June 1997. Deep in the secluded forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, a typical summer day at Camp Garnet Lake. Sanitation workers, accustomed to the unpleasant realities of their job, began their routine, emptying a septic tank. But as the pump whirred, something caught a worker's eye. A glimpse of something utterly out of place. Something horrifying. What emerged from the dark, putrid depths wasn't refuse. It was a discovery so chilling, it would shatter the quiet peace of the wilderness and leave an entire community in bewildered despair for nearly 3 decades. This isn't just a cold case. This is a story of a silent crime, a forgotten life, and the relentless pursuit of truth across generations. A secret buried in the very foundations of a beloved summer retreat, waiting for technology and one young woman's curiosity to finally bring it to light. But before we fully immerse ourselves in this mystery, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching us from today? Let us know in the comments below. Now, let's rewind to that fateful June day in 1997. The pervasive humidity of a Michigan summer, characteristic of June 1997, lay thick and still over the vast, verdant expanse of the Upper Peninsula. Nestled amidst this ancient emerald tapestry of towering white pines and robust hardwoods was Camp Garnet Lake. For generations, this rustic enclave had served as a cherished refuge, drawing families seeking respite from the clamor of urban life, lured by the placid mirror-like waters of Garnet Lake and the almost profound silence that enveloped its shores. It was a place where the insistent hum of the modern world receded, replaced by the soothing, predictable rhythms of nature, where the sharpest sound was typically the melancholic cry of a loon across the water or the soft rustle of leaves stirred by a fleeting breeze. This particular Tuesday morning dawned with the promise of routine. A small, local sanitation crew, whose members had long grown accustomed to the less savory but undeniably essential services demanded by such remote recreational facilities, arrived at the camp. Their assignment was straightforward and familiar: the scheduled emptying of the pit toilet septic tanks. It was a grimy, thankless task, but one they executed with a seasoned, almost mechanical efficiency. The air, already heavy with moisture, was made heavier by the pungent, acrid stench that was the inescapable hallmark of their work, a smell they had long since learned to compartmentalize, a professional hazard. As the heavy-duty suction hose, a thick, coiling serpent of industrial rubber, descended into the murky, unseen depths of one of the outdoor latrine pits, the powerful pump shuddered to life. Its diesel engine groaned, a low, guttural thrum that vibrated through the damp earth, drawing up the putrid contents. The workers, clad in robust, stained protective gear, supervised the operation with a practiced detachment. It was a continuous, repulsive conveyor belt of human waste, a predictable flow that had defined countless similar days. But then, an anomaly disrupted the monotonous churn. Gary, one of the more experienced crew members, noticed a peculiar resistance. The pump's pitch changed, a strained whine replacing its steady drone, and the flow of effluent became intermittent, hesitant. He leaned closer, peering into the opaque, churning mass, his brow furrowed. He anticipated seeing a dense tangle of tree roots, perhaps, or an unusually large, stubborn piece of debris that had somehow found its way into the pit. What surfaced next, however, was unmistakably artificial, profoundly out of place. A fleeting glimpse of a pale, oddly shaped object, momentarily visible before being dragged back under the dark, swirling current. It possessed a disconcerting consistency, neither the pulpy disintegration of organic matter nor the rigid solidity of typical plastic refuse. Gary's breath hitched, a sudden, involuntary spasm in his chest. A cold, primal unease, entirely alien to the professional indifference he usually cultivated, began to crawl up his spine. He quickly signaled for the pump to be disengaged. The sudden cessation of the engine's roar left an unnerving silence, amplifying the viscous, sloshing sounds emanating from the pit. With a growing sense of dread, Gary, his gloved hands trembling almost imperceptibly, began the meticulous and cautious process of retrieving the hose. He guided it slowly, painstakingly, as more of the pit's abhorrent contents were displaced. As the dark, obscuring mass shifted, the object became clearer, its form gradually emerging from the muck. It was shrouded, encased in something, a dark, viscous material that defied immediate identification, yet its shape, its terrifyingly familiar contours, were now distinct. His mind raced, desperately searching for a benign explanation, but none came. It was not a discarded doll. It was not a deflated ball. It was not debris. It was, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, the remains of a human infant. The immediate aftermath dissolved into a chaotic swirl of frantic, hushed phone calls, incredulous whispers, and a profound, collective disbelief. The small, tightly knit community of Newbury, a short drive from the seemingly tranquil Camp Garnet Lake, found itself utterly unprepared for such an abrupt, horrific intrusion into its quiet existence. Within mere hours, the serene natural beauty that defined the camp transformed into a stark, active crime scene. Emergency services, quickly followed by the distinct uniforms of the Michigan State Police and the investigators from the Mackinac County Sheriff's Office, converged on the site. Their vehicles, flashing lights muted by the dense canopy, cut stark lines through the familiar landscape. The initial responders, a mixture of seasoned professionals and younger officers, approached the scene with a palpable blend of grim resolve and undisguised revulsion. The cloying, sickening smell of the septic tank, now subtly intertwined with the clean, somber aroma of pine needles and damp earth, hung heavy and inescapable in the air. Bright yellow crime scene tape, stark and alien against the verdant foliage, was swiftly strung between the ancient trees, effectively severing the idyllic landscape from the gruesome reality unfolding beneath. Every movement by the forensic team was deliberate, every observation meticulously recorded. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, measurements precisely logged. The arduous process of recovering the tiny, decomposed remains from the biohazard-laden environment was a task that tested even the most hardened officer, a grim undertaking that no amount of training could truly desensitize them to. The fragile remains were carefully packaged and transported under secure escort to a specialized forensic laboratory, where a full autopsy could be conducted. The findings, though sadly anticipated given the macabre nature of the discovery, were no less devastating. The medical examiner's report confirmed the worst. It was indeed a female infant, remarkably well developed, with an estimated gestational age ranging from 36 to 42 weeks. This was not a preterm delivery, nor an early-stage miscarriage. This was a baby virtually ready for the world, a child who had reached the very threshold of life. Her brief existence, however, had been brutally and unnaturally terminated before she ever had the chance to draw a single breath outside the confines of the womb. The advanced state of decomposition presented significant challenges in precisely determining the cause of death. However, the medical examiner's expert assessment strongly pointed toward either a critical lack of proper medical attention at birth, leading to fatal complications, or direct suffocation. There were no indications of natural death due to disease or congenital issues. Instead, the evidence unequivocally pointed to a life abruptly and unnaturally extinguished, a life denied. News, even in the pre-internet era, possessed an uncanny speed in small towns. The revelation of a deceased infant, abandoned in such an utterly abhorrent manner at a cherished summer camp, tore through Newbury like an untamed wildfire. Conversations in the local diner hushed, their usual banter replaced by stunned, mournful silence, which soon gave way to a clamor of incredulous questions. Who could possibly commit such an act? What unfathomable depths of desperation, what chilling degree of cold depravity, could compel someone to discard a newborn in a septic tank? Parents instinctively drew their own children closer, their embraces tighter. A collective shiver of fear, grief, and bewildered sorrow rippled through the community. The tranquil refuge of Camp Garnet Lake, once a cherished symbol of summer joy and carefree youth, was now indelibly scarred, its idyllic image forever tainted by a dark, unspeakable secret. Investigators, a dedicated and tenacious team drawn from both state and local agencies, launched an intensive, all-consuming effort to unravel the mystery. The summer and autumn of 1997 became a blur of relentless, painstaking investigation. They scoured local hospital records, meticulously searching for any undocumented births, any sudden disappearances of women known to be pregnant. Every doctor, nurse, and midwife in the sprawling county was interviewed. Their memories prodded for recollections of any local woman who had been visibly pregnant and then, inexplicably, was no longer. Door-to-door canvasses were systematically conducted in Newbury and its surrounding, sparsely populated hamlets. Deputies spoke to residents, inquiring if they had seen anything unusual at or near the camp, if they had observed any suspicious vehicles, if they knew of anyone whose pregnancy had abruptly ended without explanation, or if any unusual rumors had circulated. They pursued every whisper, every tentative lead, no matter how faint or seemingly insignificant, hoping for a thread, any thread, that could unravel the macabre knot. But the leads, one after another, dissolved into frustrating dead ends. There were no witnesses who had seen anything remotely suspicious at the secluded camp around the time of the incident. No panicked calls for medical assistance had been placed to emergency services. No identifiable belongings, no scraps of infant clothing, no soiled blankets, no personal effects, were found with the baby's remains, nothing to offer even the slightest clue to her identity or that of her mother. The vast, silent forest surrounding Garnet Lake, which had witnessed the crime, offered no confession, no echo of the truth. It was as if the baby had simply materialized and then vanished without a trace, a ghost born into the cruelest of circumstances. The investigators, many of them hardened by years of dealing with human depravity, found themselves increasingly mired in frustration, their initial determination slowly yielding to a creeping, disheartening sense of futility. The sheer, impenetrable lack of any tangible, actionable evidence was profoundly confounding, a wall of silence. As the vibrant, fiery colors of Michigan's autumn foliage faded into the stark, somber grays of winter, the initial flurry of investigative activity gradually dwindled. The door-to-door inquiries ceased. The phone calls to hospitals became less frequent, the leads exhausted. The mountain of paperwork, meticulously compiled and cross-referenced, was carefully filed away, the case growing colder with each passing day. The Mackinac County Sheriff's Office and the Michigan State Police, despite their unwavering commitment, understood that without new information, without an unexpected break, the identity of the infant and the precise circumstances of her death would almost certainly remain an enduring mystery. The case, once a burning priority, slowly receded into a heavy file, tucked away in a cabinet, awaiting a future that seemed increasingly distant and improbable. In a poignant, almost desperate gesture, a collective decision was made by the investigators. To bestow upon the lost life some measure of dignity, some semblance of identity, however symbolic, the infant was officially christened Baby Garnet. Named after the shimmering lake that had borne silent witness to her unceremonious and tragic abandonment, it was a small but deeply meaningful act of respect, a quiet acknowledgment of her humanity in the face of such profound inhumanity. It was a promise that she would not be entirely forgotten. And so, the profound mystery of Baby Garnet settled over Newberry, a pervasive, chilling fog that refused to dissipate. It transcended a mere unsolved crime, evolving into a local legend, a whispered tale passed down through generations, often recounted in hushed tones around campfires or kitchen tables. It was a story of unimaginable tragedy that defied logical explanation, a haunting presence that wove itself into the quiet, predictable rhythm of the town. For decades, the questions remained, echoing unanswered in the hearts and minds of those who remembered, and those who were just learning of the harrowing event. Who was Baby Garnet? Who was her mother? And why had her nascent life ended so abruptly, so cruelly, before it had even truly begun, her tiny body consigned to the dark, submerged secret of Garnet Lake? The answers, it seemed, were forever lost to the profound, unforgiving silence of the Michigan woods, a silence that would persist for 27 long, agonizing years. 2 decades had passed since the unsettling summer of 1997, yet the profound mystery of Baby Garnet, though officially dormant, continued to cast a long, spectral shadow over the small, resilient community of Newberry, Michigan. For many of its residents, particularly the younger generations who possessed no direct memory of the initial shock, the story had gradually receded into the realm of local folklore. It was a somber legend, a cautionary fragment of the town's collective memory, occasionally recounted in hushed tones around campfires that crackled under the vast, star-dusted skies, or in the quiet corners of the local diner over steaming cups of coffee. But for most, it remained a distant historical event, a sorrowful echo from a past that felt increasingly detached from the vibrant, evolving rhythms of their present lives. The official investigation had long since been classified as a cold case, its meticulous files tucked away in state and county archives, gathering dust, a testament to an intractable puzzle that had defied resolution. By 2021, the relentless march of technological progress had profoundly reshaped daily life, introducing conveniences and connections unimaginable in the late 20th century, even in the quiet, forested enclaves like Newberry. It was here that Jenna Jurwatowski, then a vibrant 22-year-old, had built a life for herself rooted in familiarity and stability. Born and raised amidst the familiar whisper of ancient pines and the serene shimmer of countless, pristine lakes, Jenna embodied the unassuming, grounded spirit often found in her hometown. Her days unfolded with a comforting, almost predictable rhythm. Mornings were typically spent surrounded by the vibrant blooms and earthy scents of the local flower shop, where she meticulously arranged bouquets for birthdays, anniversaries, and funerals, and offered cheerful consultations to customers. Afternoons often involved enjoying the tranquil pace of small-town life, perhaps a reflective walk along the Tuquamanon River or a casual coffee with friends at the Main Street Cafe, catching up on local happenings. Evenings were usually shared with loved ones, enjoying simple meals or quiet conversation. Jenna found a deep, quiet contentment in this simplicity, in the predictable, comforting flow of her existence, free from grand ambitions or unsettling disruptions. Like virtually every native of Newberry, Jenna was intimately familiar with the story of Baby Garnet. It was, in essence, woven into the very fabric of the town's identity, an indelible mark that was impossible to avoid. She had heard the tale countless times throughout her childhood and adolescence, from her parents during family dinners, integrated into local history lessons at school, and from older neighbors who still spoke of it with a lingering sense of unease and unsolved grief. The chilling discovery at Camp Garnet Lake, the extensive but ultimately fruitless search for answers, the enduring questions that had plagued the community for decades, these details were etched into the town's collective consciousness. Yet, for Jenna, Baby Garnet was precisely that, a story. A tragic, unsettling narrative from a time before she was born, an event that belonged to a past world, one that felt vastly different and mercifully distant from her own experience. It was a fragment of history, a local myth, not a personal concern that tugged at her everyday thoughts or demanded her emotional investment. The Christmas season of 2021 brought with it a surge in a popular, burgeoning trend that had swept across the nation. Millions of people worldwide were eagerly delving into their personal histories, unearthing distant relatives, and unlocking the intricate genetic secrets held within their very DNA. Commercial ancestry tests, once a niche product marketed to history buffs, had rapidly become a mainstream phenomenon, advertised heavily across social media and television. Friends and family members exchanged stories of surprising ancestral origins, unexpected genetic connections, and rediscovered family branches. A friend of Jenna's, brimming with excitement, received a family tree DNA kit as a holiday gift. This sparked an enthusiastic conversation between them, a casual exchange in the break room of the flower shop, filled with anecdotes of distant relatives found and fascinating ethnic breakdowns revealed. This seemingly innocent conversation would, unbeknownst to Jenna, set in motion a chain of events far grander and more profound than a simple genealogical discovery. Intrigued by her friend's evident enthusiasm and the pervasive advertising for these tests, Jenna found herself drawn to the idea. It seemed like a fun, entirely innocuous venture, a low-stakes opportunity to perhaps confirm some long-held family lore or to uncover a surprising ancestral origin, perhaps from a distant European country she knew little about. What, she mused with a shrug, could possibly go wrong with a simple DNA test? Driven by this casual curiosity, and seeing it as little more than an entertaining novelty for the holiday season, she purchased a kit for herself online. It was a seemingly trivial decision, a small, impulsive act, a simple swab of her cheek that would soon unravel decades of entrenched silence and irrevocably shake the very foundations of her perceived reality. Parallel to Jenna's innocent venture into genetic ancestry, the slow, methodical gears of justice had, for years prior, begun to turn once more. In 2017, a seasoned detective with the Michigan State Police, whose identity was initially kept out of public reports to protect the integrity of the nascent reinvestigation, found himself increasingly fascinated by the dramatic advancements in forensic science. Driven by an unwavering belief in emerging scientific capabilities, particularly in the realm of DNA analysis, he decided it was time to pull the heavy, dusty cold case file of Baby Garnet from its long-forgotten shelf. The detective, a man with a quiet determination and a deep respect for unsolved cases, understood that forensic technology had advanced exponentially since that distant summer of 1997. What had been utterly impossible back then, the extraction of viable DNA from heavily degraded, environmentally compromised remains, was now becoming an increasingly routine and successful procedure, offering a beacon of hope for countless unsolved mysteries that had languished for decades, cases that many had given up on. The first critical step in this ambitious, renewed effort involved meticulously locating and re-examining the original evidence. Deep within the secure, climate-controlled depths of the Michigan State Police evidence locker, carefully cataloged and preserved for 2 decades, lay the partial femur of Baby Garnet. It was a small, fragile bone fragment, discolored by time and environment, yet a silent, enduring witness to a profound tragedy, and it represented the last, best hope for identification. This crucial piece of evidence was carefully prepared, its chain of custody rigorously documented to prevent any legal challenges, and dispatched under secure transport to one of the nation's most advanced specialized forensic laboratories. These facilities were equipped with cutting-edge technology specifically designed for the delicate and complex task of extracting DNA from old, environmentally compromised samples, often requiring micro-extraction techniques and advanced amplification processes. The process was painstaking, requiring absolute precision from forensic scientists to prevent contamination and to maximize the yield of viable genetic material. Against significant technical odds, and after weeks of meticulous work, the lab achieved success. A comprehensive genetic profile of Baby Garnet, a unique digital blueprint of her existence, was painstakingly generated, finally emerging from the biological remnants of a life almost forgotten. With a viable DNA profile now meticulously secured, the investigation pivoted sharply to the burgeoning and highly specialized field of forensic genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge discipline leverages the immense power of consumer DNA databases to identify potential relatives of an unknown individual, effectively turning abstract genetic information into an incredibly potent investigative tool. The crucial task of navigating this complex landscape was assigned to Misty Gillis, a senior forensic genealogist at Identifinders International, a company widely recognized as a pioneer and leader in this groundbreaking investigative technique. Misty Gillis was a leading expert in her field, possessing not only an astute scientific mind but also an uncanny ability to navigate the intricate, often convoluted web of human genetic connections and historical genealogical records. Her assignment was formidable: to painstakingly cross-reference Baby Garnet's newly acquired genetic profile against the vast, ever-growing public databases of DNA submitted by millions of individuals seeking their own ancestry. Misty Gillis and her dedicated team embarked on what was an arduous and intensely meticulous process, akin to constructing an immense, multi-generational family tree with countless missing branches and leaves, all based on fragmented genetic clues. They weren't searching for a direct, immediate match, as those were exceedingly rare in cold cases. Instead, their strategy focused on identifying distant cousins, second, third, or even fourth cousins, any genetic connection, no matter how remote, that could serve as a genetic breadcrumb. Each match, no matter how small the percentage of shared DNA, represented a vital piece of the expansive puzzle. From these distant relatives, Gillis would begin to meticulously build out family trees, working backward through generations. This involved exhaustive, time-consuming research into a myriad of public records: historical census data, obituaries, marriage and birth certificates, property deeds, old newspaper archives, military records, and even publicly available social media profiles. The objective was to identify common ancestors, linking the distant matches found in the DNA databases. Then, working forward from those identified common ancestors, she would painstakingly attempt to narrow down the potential candidates for Baby Garnet's parents, focusing on individuals who would have been of childbearing age and residing in or around the Newberry area in 1997. It was a complex, multi-layered investigation, demanding not just profound scientific expertise but also the keen eye of a seasoned historian, the relentless patience of an archivist, and the acute deductive reasoning of a seasoned detective. The process involved intricate triangulation methods, comparing shared DNA segments among multiple distant relatives to pinpoint common ancestral lines and exclude others. The specific challenge was immense, given the time elapsed, the rural, relatively isolated nature of the community, and the sheer volume of data to sift through. Misty Gillis understood that buried within these vast digital databases, within the intricate, interconnected tapestry of human DNA, lay the profound potential to finally give Baby Garnet her name, to restore her identity, and perhaps, to uncover the long-suppressed truth of what truly happened in the deep woods of Michigan so many years ago. The scientific foundation had been laid. Now, it was a matter of relentless, methodical research and the slow, deliberate piecing together of a digital genealogy. A silent clock, dormant for decades, had begun to tick once more, its measured cadence still unheard by those whose lives it would soon, irrevocably, alter. May of 2022 arrived in Newberry with the gentle bloom of spring, promising a return to warmer days and the familiar, comforting rhythms of small-town life. Jenna Jerwatowski, now 23, was deeply entrenched in her routine at the local flower shop, Petals and Pine. Her mornings began with the scent of fresh-cut hydrangeas and the cheerful clang of the shop bell as customers entered. Her days were a predictable cycle of arranging vibrant bouquets, watering delicate potted plants, and consulting with locals on everything from wedding arrangements to sympathy tributes. It was a life she had cultivated, simple and predictable, offering a serene contrast to the often unsettled world beyond Newberry's tranquil borders. On a Tuesday afternoon, as the sun streamed through the shop's front window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, Jenna was meticulously stripping thorns from a bundle of roses. Her phone, tucked into her apron pocket, vibrated insistently. She typically let unknown numbers go to voicemail, especially during busy hours. But for reasons she couldn't articulate even later, a faint, inexplicable pull prompted her to answer. She wiped her hands on her apron and pressed the green icon. "Hello," she answered, her voice slightly muffled by the rustle of tissue paper. "Is this Jenna Jerwatowski?" A calm, authoritative male voice inquired. The tone was formal, professional, carrying an unexpected weight. "Yes, this is Jenna," she replied, her brow furrowing slightly. "This is Detective Miller, with the Michigan State Police," the voice continued. "I'm calling about a case we've been working on, a cold case, actually." Jenna's heart, usually steady, gave an involuntary lurch. Police. A cold case. Her mind immediately raced through local news, searching for any recent incidents, but found nothing. Newberry was, by and large, a peaceful town. "Okay," she prompted, a note of apprehension creeping into her voice. "Ms. Jerwatowski, have you ever heard of the Baby Garnet case?" Detective Miller asked, his voice maintaining its even, controlled cadence. The name hit Jenna like a physical blow. Baby Garnet. The legend. The whispered tragedy. The story from before her time. For a moment, the bustling flower shop, the scent of roses, and the mundane tasks of her day seemed to recede, replaced by a sudden, chilling quiet in her mind. "Yes," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "Everyone in Newberry has." "Right," the detective acknowledged. "Well, your DNA recently came up as a match in a public database we're using. You're a relative of the infant found in 1997. The words hung in the air, heavy and disorienting. Her DNA. A match. A relative. The pieces refused to fit together. A relative of Baby Garnet? The very notion was surreal, like stepping directly into one of those hushed, old stories. The abstract, distant tragedy she had always considered folklore had, in an instant, become profoundly, terrifyingly personal. Her hands, still clutching the bundle of roses, began to tremble. A wave of confusion, quickly followed by a cold surge of panic, washed over her. It wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. Relative. Jenna repeated, the word sounding foreign, absurd on her tongue. How is that possible? Detective Miller, sensing her shock, continued calmly. Our forensic genealogist will be in touch with you shortly. She'll be able to explain more about the process and what we've uncovered. She might ask for further information regarding your DNA profile to help narrow down the family tree. He offered a number and his name again, encouraging her to call back if she had questions, then concluded the call. Jenna slowly lowered the phone, her hand still shaking. The roses slipped from her grasp, scattering across the polished concrete floor, their delicate petals bruised. The flower shop, a place of vibrant life and gentle beauty, now felt eerily silent, the air heavy with an unspoken dread. Her mind reeled, attempting to process the impossible intersection of her own genetic code and a decades-old, gruesome cold case. A relative? Who? How close? The questions swirled, relentless and terrifying. She felt a profound, destabilizing fear, a sudden awareness that the protective bubble of her simple, predictable life had just burst. Later that same day, or perhaps the next, the second call came. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but the memory of Detective Miller's words was still too fresh, too raw. Jenna answered with a hesitant readiness. "Hello, Jenna." A woman's voice, professional and energetic, greeted her. "My name is Misty Gillis. I'm a senior forensic genealogist with Identifinders International. Detective Miller told me you'd be expecting my call." Misty Gillis. The name registered from the detective's earlier conversation. This was the genealogist he mentioned, the one who would explain more. A flicker of relief, quickly extinguished by a deeper suspicion, ran through Jenna. Misty, with a practiced cadence, began to explain the process, the incredible scientific advancements that had allowed them to extract DNA from Baby Garnet's remains, and the painstaking work of building a family tree. Her voice was articulate, her explanation thorough, but a growing sense of unease settled over Jenna. Then came the request. To help us further narrow down the familial connections, Jenna, we would need to access your family tree DNA profile. Would you be able to provide your login information, or perhaps your password, so we can view your raw DNA data directly? The request struck Jenna like a cold shower. Login information? Password? An alarm bell, loud and insistent, blared in her mind. Just months prior, her grandfather, a kind but trusting man, had fallen victim to an elaborate online scam. Someone, posing as a bank representative, had requested his login credentials, claiming a security breach. He had complied, and his savings had been irrevocably compromised. The family had been shaken, and a deep-seated distrust of unsolicited requests for personal information had been instilled in Jenna. "My password?" Jenna asked, her voice hardening, laced with unconcealed suspicion. "Absolutely not. I can't give you that." Misty Gillis, perhaps accustomed to such caution, attempted to reassure her. "I understand your hesitation, Jenna. We work with law enforcement, and this is a completely secure process. It would greatly accelerate our ability to identify closer relatives of Baby Garnet." "No," Jenna stated, more firmly this time. "My grandfather just went through a terrible scam. There's no way I'm giving my private login information to anyone over the phone. You'll have to find another way." The words tumbled out, fueled by a mix of fear, mistrust, and a raw, unresolved anger over her grandfather's ordeal. She felt an overwhelming need to protect herself, to erect a barrier against this unsettling intrusion. Without waiting for another word, Jenna ended the call, disconnecting with a definitive click. She stood there, phone in hand, heart pounding, convinced she had just dodged a bullet. The logical part of her brain, clouded by recent trauma, had immediately categorized Misty Gillis's call as a sophisticated follow-up scam, capitalizing on the initial, startling revelation from Detective Miller. The following week was an agonizing blur of uncertainty and internal turmoil. The carefully constructed predictability of Jenna's life had shattered. Every unfamiliar phone call sent a jolt of anxiety through her. The story of Baby Garnet, once a distant legend, now felt like a predatory presence, constantly lurking at the edges of her thoughts. She recounted the calls to her mother, Kara, who listened with a mix of concern and bewilderment. Kara, too, found the story incredible, struggling to grasp how Jenna's innocent DNA test could connect them to such a dark chapter of Newberry's past. They spoke of the police detective's call, and then of the genealogist's suspicious request. "It has to be a scam, honey," Kara had finally concluded, echoing Jenna's own fears. "After what happened to Grandpa, you did the right thing hanging up." This shared interpretation provided a fragile, temporary comfort, but the underlying dread remained. Jenna found it difficult to focus at work, her mind constantly replaying the detective's words, the chilling name Baby Garnet, and the impossible notion of a familial link. Sleep offered little reprieve, her dreams haunted by fragmented images and whispered questions. Then, a week after the incident with Misty Gillis, as Jenna was finishing up a complex bridal arrangement, her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed a familiar name, Mom. She answered immediately, expecting a routine chat about dinner or local gossip. Instead, Kara's voice on the other end was not merely concerned or bewildered, but raw with barely contained panic, trembling with an urgency that instantly eclipsed any prior unease. "Jenna!" Kara exclaimed, her voice strained and thin, almost a desperate gasp. "You need to come home. It's an emergency. You need to get here." The sharp, sudden dread that pierced Jenna's chest was unlike anything she had felt before. Her mother's tone left no room for doubt. This was not a casual request or a minor issue. Something truly terrible had happened, or was about to be revealed. The bridal bouquet slipped from her numb fingers, scattering roses and lilies across the countertop. Her carefully constructed world, already fragile, now seemed to crumble entirely. The long-dormant secrets of Newberry were no longer just stories. They were actively reaching out, pulling her into their cold, unyielding embrace, foreshadowing a revelation far more profound and devastating than anything she could have possibly imagined. Jenna, leaving the flower shop in disarray, rushed out the door, her mind a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities as she sped towards an unknown future. The frantic drive from the flower shop to her childhood home, a route usually traversed with casual familiarity through the tree-lined streets of Newbury, became a terrifying, accelerated blur for Jenna. Her mother's voice, raw with unconcealed panic, echoed insistently in her ears, each strained syllable amplifying the icy dread that had taken root deep in her chest. An emergency. The word resonated with an ominous, chilling weight, hinting at a disaster far beyond any petty local incident or family squabble. As Jenna's car screeched to a halt in the familiar driveway, the sight of her mother's older sedan, parked alongside an unfamiliar dark, unmarked vehicle, sent a fresh, sharp wave of anxiety through her. The front door of the house stood slightly ajar, a silent, almost foreboding invitation. Bursting through the doorway, Jenna found herself abruptly propelled into the familiar warmth of her family kitchen. But the atmosphere within was anything but comforting. Instead, it was thick with a palpable tension, heavy with unspoken grief. Gathered around the sturdy, round wooden table, typically the vibrant heart of family gatherings, were three figures. Her mother, Kara, sat hunched, her shoulders trembling, her face streaked with fresh tears, her hands clasped tightly together on the worn wooden surface, white-knuckled and shaking. Across from her sat Aunt Sharon, Kara's cousin, whose professional life as a victim advocate in the county prosecutor's office had granted her an air of composed resilience. Yet, even Sharon's usual composure was completely shattered. Her face was a mask of pure, profound shock, her eyes wide and fixed on some unseen internal horror. Two men in somber, plain clothes occupied the remaining chairs, their demeanor grave and professional. One of them, Jenna recognized with a sudden, sickening jolt, was Detective Miller, the Michigan State Police officer who had made that unsettling call to her just a week prior. "Mom!" Jenna gasped, her voice barely a whisper, the scene before her a tableau of utter distress and bewilderment. "What's going on? What happened? Are you okay?" Kara slowly lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes red-rimmed and distant, focusing on her daughter with an effort. "Jenna," she choked out, her voice breaking, thick with emotion. It's real. Everything they said. It's all real." Aunt Sharon, finding her voice and attempting to project a semblance of her professional self despite her own visible turmoil, took over. Her words, though delivered with a practiced gravity, were underpinned by a profound personal shock. "Jenna, the forensic genealogist. Misty Gillis. She's been working very closely with the police. They were able to use your DNA from family tree DNA to meticulously build out a family tree connecting to Baby Garnet. It turns out, it's not a scam, honey. None of it." The confirmation, delivered with such somber finality, sent a fresh, powerful jolt through Jenna. The protective wall of skepticism she had painstakingly built around herself a week ago, the firm conviction that she had narrowly escaped a sophisticated scam, crumbled instantly into dust. This was not a fraud. This was undeniably real. And the reality, judging by the expressions of devastation on her mother's and cousin's faces, was far more profound and devastating than any fictionalized threat she could have ever imagined. Her breath caught in her throat, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. Detective Miller, a keen observer of human reactions, recognized Jenna's distress and spoke with a measured, calm voice, attempting to provide a semblance of clarity amidst the overwhelming emotional chaos. "Ms. Jurwatowski, we understand this is incredibly overwhelming and difficult to process. We received the confirmed genetic report earlier today, directly from Identifinders International. The results are conclusive. Your DNA, combined with the comprehensive genealogical research conducted by Ms. Gillis, has established an undeniable and clear familial link to Baby Garnet." He paused, allowing the immense gravity of his words to fully sink into the stunned silence of the kitchen. "Jenna, the tests definitively reveal you are Baby Garnet's half-niece. And Kara," he then gently turned his gaze to her mother, his expression softening slightly with empathy, "you are Baby Garnet's half-sister." The air in the kitchen seemed to grow heavy, thick and oppressive, pressing down on Jenna. Half-niece. Half-sister. The clinical, precise terminology, delivered by a police detective, painted an immediate picture of an intimate, inescapable familial connection. Baby Garnet, the decades-old mystery, the tragic, whispered legend of Newbury, was not just a distant story. She was family. Her mother's sister. Her own aunt. The revelation was not merely shocking, it was profoundly disorienting, violently rewriting their entire family history in an instant, twisting the familiar into something horrifyingly alien. Jenna felt a visceral wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of reality slipping out of focus. Kara, her face ashen and drawn, slowly absorbed the detective's words. Her mind, reeling from the initial shock, began to grapple with the implications. A half-sister. That meant they shared one biological parent. Her father, Jenna's grandfather, a kind and honorable man, had passed away years ago. His lineage was well known, uncomplicated, and unequivocally accounted for. That left only one terrifying possibility: her mother. A deep, almost suffocating silence descended upon the kitchen once more, broken only by Kara's ragged, uneven breathing and the distant ticking of the wall clock. 4 years, Kara had carried a different, more personal burden, a long-standing, deep-seated trauma related to her own mother, Nancy Jurwatowski. The relationship between Kara and Nancy had been volatile, profoundly toxic, and deeply damaging from Kara's earliest memories. Filled with emotional abuse and unpredictability, it had left lasting scars. Kara had made the excruciating but ultimately necessary decision to sever all ties with her mother when she was just 18 years old, effectively escaping what she described as an emotionally corrosive and unstable environment. With immense effort and resilience, she had meticulously built a new life, creating a stable and loving home for Jenna, deliberately choosing to distance herself from Nancy's chaotic and harmful influence. Jenna, now 23, had never once met her maternal grandmother. Nancy was merely a name, a distant, almost mythical figure in their family's fractured history, an absence that Kara rarely spoke of, a deep, unhealed wound that she had carefully compartmentalized for decades. But now, sitting at that kitchen table, with the crushing weight of the undeniable DNA revelation pressing down on her, the fragmented pieces of a dark, long-buried puzzle clicked into place for Kara with agonizing precision. The dates of the Baby Garnet discovery. The isolated location of the camp, so close to their former home. The impossible, undeniable genetic link now connecting her directly to the infant. A wave of sickening certainty, cold and absolute, washed over her, replacing confusion with a horrifying, undeniable clarity. Her eyes, still brimming with tears, now held a new, terrible resolve. She looked directly at Detective Miller, her voice barely audible, but firm with an unshakable conviction that resonated through the quiet room. "If it's anyone," Kara whispered, her voice a strained, broken sound, yet imbued with an almost desperate certainty, "it's my mother. It has to be Nancy." The detective nodded slowly, his expression grave, acknowledging the profound truth in her statement. This was precisely the lead they had been meticulously working towards, the name they had been searching for. A potential suspect, finally emerging from 2.5 decades of impenetrable silence. The preliminary genetic information provided by Jenna's DNA, painstakingly researched and analyzed by Misty Gillis, had, in its complex triangulation, indeed pointed them squarely towards Nancy Jurwatowski. The intricate web of genetic connections had led them from an anonymous infant to a living, breathing individual, a ghost from the past now given a name. The narrative then shifted, geographically and thematically, across vast distances. The methodical process of law enforcement, once hampered by a cold, impenetrable trail, now moved with renewed purpose and focused intensity. Investigators from the Michigan State Police, armed with the compelling genetic evidence and Kara's agonizing, yet crucial testimony, traveled westward, far from the familiar, hushed forests of Michigan, crossing several state lines to the rugged, expansive landscapes of Wyoming. This was where Nancy Jurwatowski had established a new life years prior, deliberately distancing herself from Newberry, from the haunting memories of Camp Garnet Lake, and from a past she had meticulously sought to erase. She had cultivated a quiet, seemingly unremarkable existence, her dark secret effectively buried beneath miles of wind-swept plains and imposing mountains. The confrontation with Nancy Jurwatowski occurred discreetly in her Wyoming home. The specific, intricate details of the initial interaction, the exact questions posed and Nancy's precise responses, were not immediately released to the public, carefully withheld to protect the ongoing investigation. However, official reports later confirmed that she was confronted by law enforcement with the irrefutable evidence that had led them to her doorstep. Initially, Nancy adamantly denied any involvement, any knowledge, any connection whatsoever to the Baby Garnet case. She maintained her composure, presenting a stoic facade of innocence and confusion, consistent with someone who had successfully guarded a dark, terrible secret for over 2 decades. Her denials were firm, practiced, but the investigators were prepared. They had not traveled across states without a solid, unshakable foundation of evidence. They calmly and methodically presented her with the scientific facts. The precise DNA profile of Baby Garnet, the direct genetic match to her granddaughter Jenna, and, by undeniable extension, to her daughter Kara. They meticulously explained the complex, painstaking genealogical work conducted by Misty Gillis that had led them directly to her. They laid out the cold, hard science that transcended any verbal denial, any carefully constructed narrative. DNA, as a silent and unforgiving witness, does not lie. Faced with this overwhelming and irrefutable genetic evidence, the carefully constructed wall of her denial, built piece by piece over 25 years, began to crack, then crumble. The truth, long suppressed, long hidden beneath layers of time, distance, and conscious effort, started its agonizing, inevitable ascent to the surface. A legal search warrant was swiftly obtained, allowing investigators to collect new, official DNA samples directly from Nancy Jurwatowski for a definitive, direct comparison. These samples were rushed to the lab. The scientific truth was inescapable. The match was conclusive. Nancy Jurwatowski was, beyond any shadow of a doubt, the biological mother of Baby Garnet. The 2.5-decade-old mystery had found its agonizing answer, not in a breakthrough confession, but in the silent, unforgiving language of genetics. The truth, once a whispered legend, had now materialized, shattering lives and exposing a family trauma of unimaginable proportions. Confronted with the irrefutable scientific proof of DNA, the meticulously constructed wall of denial that Nancy Jurwatowski had maintained for a quarter of a century finally crumbled. The silent, unforgiving language of genetics had stripped away her carefully maintained facade, leaving her with no viable recourse but to break the agonizing silence. In the quiet, unassuming confines of her Wyoming home, thousands of miles removed from the Michigan forests where her secret was born, Nancy finally began to recount her version of the events of June 1997. Her voice, initially hesitant and strained, a mere whisper filled with years of unspoken fear, gradually gained a fragile, trembling momentum as she began to unburden herself of a truth she had carried, alone, like a lead weight in her soul for 25 years. She described a day shrouded in desperate secrecy and profound isolation. She claimed to have been entirely alone at her modest home in Newberry, Michigan, when she unexpectedly went into labor. The remote location of her residence and the technological limitations of the time, 1997, a period when cell phones were still a luxury few rural residents possessed, and landlines were the primary means of communication, often unreliable in such isolated areas, meant she had no immediate access to help. Panic, she claimed, had set in swiftly, an overwhelming wave that drowned out any rational thought. In her distress, she retreated to the perceived privacy of her bathtub, a desperate, solitary act of self-reliance or, perhaps, a tragic manifestation of her profound isolation and fear of judgment. It was there, alone and unaided, that she gave birth. However, she recounted, something went terribly, tragically wrong during the delivery. The baby, a girl, became stuck in the birth canal, a horrifying complication that amplified her terror. In a frenzy of excruciating pain, burgeoning fear, and mounting panic, she desperately tried to pull the infant free, but her efforts, alone and untrained, proved futile. She claimed to have then lost consciousness, overwhelmed by the physical ordeal, the torrent of blood, and the raw psychological terror of her situation. When she awoke, she alleged, moments or minutes later, the baby was no longer moving, no longer crying. Her tiny body was blue, cold, lifeless, and utterly silent. The profound, suffocating silence in the bathroom was absolute, an emptiness that chillingly echoed the one that had just opened in her heart. Overwhelmed by a potent cocktail of shock, profound despair, and a paralyzing, all-consuming fear of the devastating social and legal consequences, Nancy stated she did not know what to do. There was no one to turn to, no clear path to take that didn't expose her darkest secret. In her panicked, irrational state, she made a decision that would haunt a community for decades and forever alter the course of several lives. She carefully placed the infant's lifeless body into a nondescript bag, a desperate attempt to erase the horrifying reality. Then, she drove the 32 kilometers, approximately 20 miles, along dark, winding rural roads to Camp Garnet Lake, a place that, ironically, represented idyllic childhood memories and carefree summers for many local families. Under the deep cloak of night or the pre-dawn hours, she discreetly, meticulously, discarded the remains into the deep, dark confines of an outdoor pit toilet septic tank, a place designed for waste, not for the burial of a child. With that horrifying, desperate act, she returned home, carrying the immense, crushing weight of her secret, a silent, suffocating burden that she bore alone for a quarter of a century, burying it deeper within herself than the infant herself was buried in the earth. She lived a life perpetually looking over her shoulder, the ghost of her actions a constant, tormenting companion. However, the prosecution's interpretation of Nancy Jurwatowski's raw, emotional account painted a starkly different, far more incriminating picture. They meticulously analyzed every available piece of evidence: the detailed forensic report from the re-examination of Baby Garnet's remains, the comprehensive autopsy report from 1997, and the broader circumstances surrounding the infant's discovery. The state of Michigan, through its prosecuting attorneys, vehemently contested key aspects of Nancy's narrative, framing her actions not as a series of unfortunate, panicked reactions, but as a pattern of criminal negligence and deliberate concealment. While acknowledging the potential for extreme panic during a solitary birth, they argued that the baby's death was not an unavoidable tragedy but a preventable one. The medical examiner's findings, though complicated by 2 decades of decomposition, had consistently pointed towards asphyxia as the most probable cause of death. Prosecutors contended that if Nancy had sought any form of medical attention, if she had even attempted to make a desperate call for help, even from a neighbor whose phone might have been accessible, or by driving to the nearest hospital, however distant, the infant's life could have been saved. Her deliberate failure to do so, they argued, constituted criminal negligence, leading directly and inexorably to the baby's untimely demise. Furthermore, the prosecution focused heavily and damningly on the act of discarding the body. They described it not as a desperate, panicked action of a woman in profound shock, but as a deliberate, calculated, and cold-hearted attempt to conceal a crime. Abandoning a newborn, even a deceased one, in the foul, degrading confines of a septic tank was presented as an act of profound cruelty, an ultimate disrespect for human life, designed to ensure the infant would never be found, never identified, and never afforded a proper burial or mourning. This, they asserted, was not a mere mistake in judgment born of fear. It was an active, heinous concealment of a death that, in their view, Nancy was unequivocally responsible for. Based on these stark interpretations and the overwhelming genetic evidence, Nancy Jurwatowski was formally charged with several serious offenses: open murder, involuntary manslaughter, and concealment of death. Open murder is a broad charge in Michigan that allows the jury to determine the specific degree of murder, encompassing everything from first-degree, premeditated, to second-degree murder, implying that the prosecution believed there was an intent to kill or, at the very least, a reckless disregard for life. Involuntary manslaughter, a charge that often runs concurrently, suggested that Nancy's actions, or crucial inactions, led to the death without direct intent to kill, but through gross negligence or reckless behavior. Concealment of death, a lesser but still significant felony, specifically addressed the act of discarding the body in a clandestine manner to prevent its discovery, a charge that the physical evidence clearly supported. Nancy, then 60 years old, was granted bail but confined to her Wyoming home with an electronic ankle monitor, a constant, physical reminder of the charges she faced. She remained there, awaiting trial, her fate hanging precariously in the balance as the legal system prepared to dissect every agonizing detail of her 25-year-old secret. For Jenna and Kara Jurwatowski, the ensuing legal proceedings were a surreal, deeply painful ordeal, unfolding from a distance in the quiet backdrop of Newberry. They followed the sparse news reports, the terse legal statements released by the prosecutor's office, and the occasional, somber updates from Detective Miller with a bewildering mixture of disbelief, profound grief, and a gut-wrenching sense of betrayal. The initial shock of the DNA revelation had given way to a deep-seated anguish, forcing them to reevaluate their entire family history, their understanding of themselves, and their perception of a long-estranged relative, all through the harsh, unforgiving lens of this newly unearthed trauma. Kara, in particular, wrestled with the immense weight of her mother's alleged actions, struggling to reconcile the fragmented, often painful memories of her own difficult childhood with the horrifying reality of what Nancy was now accused of. The emotional wounds from her past, which she had worked so diligently and painfully to seal shut for decades, had been violently torn open, bleeding anew, leaving her raw and exposed. A crucial pre-trial hearing took place in December of 2024, a legal skirmish that would significantly impact the trajectory of the upcoming trial. The defense team, seeking to weaken the prosecution's case and potentially dismiss the most severe charges, argued vehemently that Nancy's statements to the police should be deemed inadmissible, claiming her constitutional rights might have been violated during the initial, emotionally charged interrogation. They also vigorously contended that the state could not definitively prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Baby Garnet was actually born alive. If the infant was proven to be stillborn, the legal charges related to homicide, open murder and involuntary manslaughter would be significantly undermined, potentially reducing the case to only concealment of death, a less severe felony. The outcome of this hearing would be pivotal, shaping the entire trajectory of the trial and determining the extent of Nancy's legal culpability and potential punishment. As Nancy remained free on bond, monitored electronically in her distant Wyoming home, the intricate legal chess match played out, meticulously dissecting every chilling detail of that distant summer day in 1997, leaving the family members to grapple with the agonizing uncertainty. For Jenna, the entire experience felt profoundly surreal, a waking nightmare that had hijacked her once simple life. A seemingly innocuous decision to purchase a DNA test, a casual swab of her cheek meant to uncover benign ancestral origins, had instead become the undeniable catalyst for unearthing a dark, terrifying secret that her grandmother, a woman she had never known, a figure she had only perceived as a distant, painful absence, had guarded with chilling resolve for over 2 decades. The small, quiet, predictable life she had cherished in Newberry had been irrevocably altered, its innocence shattered. Baby Garnet, after 27 long years of anonymity, finally had a name. She finally had a story, however tragic and deeply contested, brought, however painfully, into the light. Her brief existence, once cruelly erased and abandoned, was now acknowledged, recognized, and given a voice. But the truth, when it finally surfaced, brought with it not a comforting sense of closure, but a fresh cascade of pain, profound trauma, and agonizing uncertainty for the Jurwatowski family. The resolution of the cold case, while a significant triumph for forensic science and the pursuit of justice, simultaneously shattered lives and exposed deep, festering familial wounds that might never truly heal. The mystery that had haunted Newberry for 27 years was, in a sense, finally resolved. Yet, it left in its wake a bitter, lingering taste, a profound sense of loss, and complex ethical questions. The unearthed truth brought far more questions than definitive answers about human desperation, the crushing weight of fear, the enduring power of secrets, and the complex, often devastating ripple effects of individual actions. It served as a stark, chilling reminder that sometimes, the most profound and devastating secrets, buried deep within the forgotten corners of memory or the silent, unforgiving forests of Michigan, have an almost supernatural way of returning to the surface, no matter how much time has passed. And sometimes, all it takes to unravel decades of carefully constructed lies and unleash generational trauma is a curious young woman, a simple DNA test, and the relentless march of scientific progress. The silence was broken, but the reverberations of its shattering would echo for years to come, a testament to the enduring, complex nature of truth, memory, and justice. The silence that had enveloped Baby Garnet for 27 years was finally shattered, not by a confession in a hushed interrogation room, but by the undeniable whisper of DNA. A casual curiosity in Newberry, Michigan, linked by an invisible thread across state lines to a long-forgotten crime, peeled back layers of time and deception. Nancy Jurwatowski's desperate secret, buried beneath layers of earth and decades of silence, was violently exhumed, bringing to light a contested narrative of a solitary birth, a tragic death, and a cruel abandonment. The pursuit of justice, now moving through the stark formalities of legal proceedings, sought to weigh panic against culpability, desperate action against criminal negligence. For Jenna and Kara, the revelation of a lost relative unearthed not just a cold case, but a profound family trauma, irrevocably altering their understanding of their past and the woman they knew only as an estranged mother or an unknown grandmother. Baby Garnet, once a nameless ghost, finally had an identity, a story to be told, yet its telling ripped open wounds that decades had only managed to scar, revealing the enduring, destructive power of hidden truths. This story forces us to confront the profound impact of secrets, how they fester, shaping lives in the shadows, and how, inevitably, they find their way back to the surface, often with devastating consequences. It is a stark reminder that the threads of our past are inextricably woven into our present, and even the most meticulously buried truths can emerge, carried by the currents of time and the relentless march of discovery. What hidden histories, what unresolved pains, lie dormant beneath the tranquil facade of our own communities, waiting for an unexpected spark to bring them to light. We've explored the depths of this complex case, but we're eager to hear your thoughts. What do you believe truly happened in that bathroom in 1997? Share your insights and theories in the comments below. If this journey into the truth behind the silence resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to After the Silence for more true crime narratives.